Chairman Fletcher, Supervisors, thank you for having me here. I know a lot of you, we've corresponded via email, over Twitter. You may know me as that annoying data guy on KUSI who appears every now and then. My name is Justin Hart. I'm a resident of San Diego. My wife Jenny and I have 8 kids between us. I'm a data analyst by trade. I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, but I'm a pretty darn good data guy. And I normally wouldn't insert myself into someone else's domain, but they sure seem to be inserting themselves into my domain, my kids' education, my life, my business, my church. And so I hope that you'll forgive us if we check the math, because we've checked the math and a lot of it is wrong. But I want to shift things because I could probably drop a bunch of points, go viral, bashing the county board for extreme actions like closing businesses at the drop of a single positive test, or heaven forbid, padlocking my daughter's favorite swing set on the local park for 6 months so she couldn't play outside. I could point out that really, honestly, there are no solutions to a viral respiratory pathogen. There are only trade-offs. We can only flatten the curve and draw down non-COVID traffic to hospitals, but then you end up misdiagnosing or undiagnosing 50% of cancers last spring, and now we're seeing stage 3 and 4 cancers. You can keep kids out of school to hope that you might quell the disease, but the trade-off is, nationally, we miss 250,000 cases of alleged child abuse because it's typically wide-eyed teachers and administrators who call those out. Those trade-offs are really dreadful. You can also mask up kids, and you can see the IQ of pandemic children drop. As my daughter's pre-K teacher said, see if you can teach a kid how to pronounce the letter H through a mask. I could keep dropping these truth bombs, but I won't. Instead, I'm going to do something that's sort of against the nature of what a lot of people have said here. I'm going to tell you how you can keep your jobs, because I think this is important. I think there are things that you can actually do. Here are 7 things. 1, you've actually done this one already, and I truly do want to applaud you, Nathan, and others for implementing the monoclonal antibody stations around the county. I think that was an excellent move. Governor DeSantis of Florida beat you by a few weeks, but you wiped away some of the criticism he was faced, and you did it anyways because it was the right thing. We know that monoclonal antibodies, for example, have been tested on humans since the early 80s, whereas the mRNA vaccines have only had their first trial since about 2015 on humans. So those are things that I feel are very confident people can feel confident towards. Number 2, here's an incredible idea for you. I mean this sincerely. Why don't you make a blister kit for people once they test positive? We know now that there's a lot of prophylactics, a lot of things that you can do. For example, high doses of vitamin D, of zinc, of NAC, of quercetin, even just an aspirin. We know from recent studies that even things like Pepsid, or even as we've seen in recent studies, antidepressant medication could be succinct to help people stave off those disease. One of the biggest mistakes we made in the pandemic was to make hospitals the end point of care and the beginning point of care. If you got tested, it was go home, and if you feel sick, go to the ER. We've got to do something. I think San Diego can actually lead the county in providing a type of blister kit at the point of positive test where people could actually make a difference in between that time, and heaven forbid they get to the ER. Number 3, I would encourage the county to avoid business mandates. Todd Gloria tried that out. We saw where that went. I think there's just no taste in the county for any sort of retail or any sort of vaccine mandates for normal business life, right? Number 4, I would encourage you to be honest and accurately describe the risk of mortality for COVID-19. The median age of death is about 80 years old for the COVID-19, and we also know that every 20 years underneath that, your risk drops by about a factor of 10. So if you are 60 years old, your risk is about 10 times less than an 80-year-old. If you're 40 years old, the risk is about 100 times lower than an 80-year-old. If you are 20 years old, your risk of dying of COVID and even towards hospitalization and death is 1,000 times lower than an 80-year-old. And don't get to our kids, because then it gets another factor. We know this risk is very small for them. And so just be honest. No fear-mongering. Just lay out the facts as they are, and know that there isn't a panacea. There are only trade-offs. That's number 4. Just be honest. Number 5, this is a case-demic. That is, the cases are a big portion of what's happening there. And so I would encourage you to go to the contractors that you have for the testing regimes and allow them to put forth the CT levels. That is, the levels that tell us at what level have found a virus. We know from different reports that about 40, even as high as 90% of all positive tests do not have a live virus in them. That is, if you took in culturum, you could not find that. That's from multiple studies out there as well. So those changes in case-demic, in the cases, the way that we track those things, the way that we allocate, I think would be very positive as well. Number 6, If you want to keep your jobs, I would suggest that you try to get some more data out of the hospitals. We're getting a lot of very muddy data from there. For example, we have inside documents from one of the large health conglomerates here, which says that they test vaccinated people differently than they test unvaccinated people. And I understand this. If a person comes into an ER and they have an infected toenail and that person is not vaccinated, the rule of law for Scripps is that you test them and you test them for COVID. If they happen to test positive for COVID, they're now a COVID hospitalization. If the same person goes in and they have an infected toenail, same disease, and they're vaccinated, they don't bother to test them. You ought to get those details so we can have a gradation of, and you notice how the language changed from vaccinated to not fully vaccinated, so that's important. And lastly, of course, schools and kids. The evidence on masking kids is sparse and unconvincing. And you can prove it very quickly. We all know, for example, most scientists agree that cloth masks are unacceptable and really about 90% penetration almost immediately there. And I don't know if you've been around a school, but most of them wear cloth masks. So every kid I know that would love to be rid of this. I hope we can find ways to do that. But most importantly, we should just consider that how low of a risk they really are. And again, so these are all the 7 different things I would consider if you want to keep your jobs. I think there's some really proactive things we can do. And lastly, look, the number one thing you can do to keep your job, please don't padlock my kid's swing set again. Please don't do that. Thank you guys very much.